Hi guys, and welcome back to another video. So for today's sketchbook session, it is going to be a little bit shorter than some of my previous sessions, and it's mainly being that I'm not too fond of this particular drawing or even the sketch that I'm going to do at the very end, but please bear with me. So I basically have this sketch in my sketchbook from maybe 2 weeks ago, and I haven't touched it since, and I kind of want to try attempting doing something with it. So we are going to be painting with gouache today, and I do have my watercolors here to kind of like prep the paper a little bit, but I'm not gonna kind of do it in the usual way that I tend to paint with gouache, which is usually I paint with watercolor first and then I paint with gouache afterwards. So instead, I'm doing a very quick wash of kind of like a yellow goldish color to give the kind of paper a little bit of a mid-tone. Not exactly a mid-tone, it's a little bit too late to be a mid-tone, but some color to work with, but I'm not blocking out the kind of colors of the character this time. I'm going to try my best to do a little bit of lighter layers with gouache first, and I don't know, I think I'm going to probably practice using gouache a little bit more. I want to try doing some landscapes and stuff to kind of ease myself into it, because whenever I kind of like focus on a face too much, I do focus just purely on the face and everything else just becomes very lacking. So I kind of want to do maybe some landscapes and actually practice up like layering and color mixing and all that first, and then we can go back and do some more like portraiture and stuff and just play around with it. But I did not talk about who I'm drawing today. So if you're not familiar with Honkai Star Rail, like the game, I am drawing Dr. Ratio, and I'm sure if you're not familiar with the game, he probably sounds like a very ridiculous name, but I promise you that is his name. So his color scheme is very much, I want to say it's like purple, yellow, and white for the most part. He does have like hints of other colors, but for today's piece, I don't think I show that much anyways, and like I said, whenever I start to focus more on the face, I tend to neglect a lot of the other areas just because I care too much about making the face look kind of like more pristine or like in a particular way that I won't dislike it, even though I kind of dislike this piece in general. So I also usually paint on the left side first rather than just on the right side, kind of like leaving this weird gap or like space on the left. And the reason being is that initially when I had this sketch in my sketchbook, I think I had plans of doing this drawing as in kind of like an alcohol marker drawing rather than a gouache painting. So I was planning to do that, but in the end, because I didn't really want to touch the sketch at some point, I just kind of like skipped this page and kept sketching. So even though I'm not fond of the sketch on the other side of the page either, I didn't really want to kind of like make that page muddy by doing alcohol markers, and this paper really takes in the ink a lot to the point where the bleed through is almost like 1-to-1. So the bleed through is quite heavy, and I don't really want to sacrifice the drawings on the other side too much. So I was kind of debating between doing watercolors or just gouache in general, but today I think I did end up just deciding to do gouache. Now I'm going to give you a little bit of a heads up. I've changed my camera setup since I think for like a few weeks now, but I'm still fiddling with the settings and I'm not liking it all too much. I definitely think it's a little bit of a higher quality image, but I am dealing with a lot of problems with the colors alongside with some noise due to lack of lighting. So I'm going to be looking into another new camera at some point because it's already too late to return this one because I bought it last year, but I just happened to use it in January, so it's already past the date for me to return it, which kind of sucks, but I will either use it for like B-roll in the future or I'll try my best to tweak it as much as possible. So like one problem you're probably going to see when I'm using this camera in particular is that the darker colors, especially if it's leaning closer to black, it will go super high contrasted and really dark really easily. You can kind of see it like near areas like where my hand tends to close and stuff because there's like a lot of dark areas and no light kind of like seeping through. So from time to time when I'm going to be painting Dr. Ratio, he might appear, or at least like his hair and his clothing might get darker and lighter throughout the video, and that's the reason why. I also think that at some point you're gonna see a lot of like fuzziness or a little bit of texture from my camera, and it's because I try my best, especially more recently since I've changed where my location of filming is to somewhere that I can get more natural light, just because it's a little bit easier to manage when I'm doing traditional medium. But because we're still kind of in the winter season for, I guess, like the amount of daylight, if this makes sense, because winters tend to have longer nights and shorter days, it gives me less time to work with the sunlight. So later on I am going to run out of sunlight, and the lack of sunlight kind of makes things look a little bit darker, and my camera reacts very poorly to it because it creates a lot of noise. So hopefully it won't be too noticeable, because I think this might be day 2 of painting this. I painted the first session a little bit too late in the day, so I ran out of daylight way too quickly. And the way how my setup is, setting up some of my lights onto my desk creates like some really heavy duty shadows, so I didn't really want to pull them out. I think I have an alternative set up on my left side of my setup now that I can use to film something a little bit more consistently without worrying about the sunlight. But this room also lacks curtains, it only has blinds, so I kind of have to balance between using natural light and then switching back to artificial light, kind of back and forth. But I'm going to try my best to keep it consistent so that the visuals don't change too much. But for the painting process, so I mentioned earlier that I kind of want to dabble more into gouache painting, and I want to do more of the approach of layering up with kind of more sheer layers and less like thick paint, because the way how I use gouache, especially in the very beginning and even until now, is that I tend to start off with a very thick consistency right off the bat. And I feel like the appeal of gouache especially is that you kind of get that watercolor technique as well as the capabilities of watercolor alongside with the opaqueness and the kind of matte finish and, I don't know, very bright bold colors, and being able to layer up lighter colors on top of darker colors quite easily with the kind of nature of gouache. And I don't really utilize that all too much because I'm always caring too much about having a very uniform texture on the entire piece, which is why I tend to like having very much a thicker application and potentially very like bold, clean colors to a certain extent. And I know some people mentioned that some of my gouache pieces look like they're digital, and that might be the reason why. So I am going to probably play around with hopefully layering and doing a little bit more glazing and all that stuff before we start to add more of the thicker opaque paint. And hopefully the layering will help kind of create more depth and get me a little bit more used to being able to, I don't know, create different effects alongside with color accuracy, and hopefully my brain won't be too bogged down with trying to make everything look a little bit more like clean and pristine, because I can definitely tell sometimes when I work on pieces, especially if it's like traditional medium, as soon as like things start to go kind of like off the path or a little bit not to exactly like what I want it to be, I start to lose motivation. So I think for this piece, I kind of like flopped around between like working on his hair, and then later on I stopped working on his face, and then I'll go back to the hair because I kept trying to fix it. Because a part of me just really hates the right side of his hair, and I wish I pushed it to have more contrast and into shadow more, and I just don't like the shapes of it, because you can see I'm covering it up again and then I'll repaint it, but at this point I don't think it looks any better, but I want to stop like retouching it at some point. So I don't know, I feel like there's a lot of things that I could combat my issues with like a lot of my gouache pieces if I take the time to do like layering and planning. So I want to do that in the future, and I want to do more like landscapes or kind of more I guess like less focus on a figure, but maybe the figure is still present. We'll see. I've been watching like so many gouache videos, and I really want to paint because I am always in awe of like a lot of gouache artists, and one of them that I really love, and I've been watching them for such a long time, but I kind of like stopped watching them for a little bit, so I went back and I'm still very much in love with their artwork. So their name is noma.dic, or like DIC, so nomadic, but there's like a period between Noma and the last part of their name. And I just love the way that they layer up their colors and all their textures and stuff, and they do a lot of like sheer layers and very like detailed work and stuff. So I kind of want to dabble more into gouache so that I can at least push towards that kind of proficiency at some point. But right now, definitely still struggling with liking this piece. I think I just don't like his face in general, and I don't know if I even liked the sketch to begin with when I first started to sketch him. So I don't know if I was going to be banking on the fact that I would have had to do line work first, and then I would be able to have a little bit more control by working with markers. So gouache is a little bit difficult for me, I guess. I definitely struggle with it a lot. At least like to me I do, if that makes sense. I know some people are like, oh, like I like your gouache pieces, like I think they're fine as is. But for me, maybe it's because I keep looking at like certain pieces that I personally really like, so I really want to achieve that look. So I'm gonna work hard. I'm gonna try my best to paint a lot more this year is kind of like my goal. So hopefully it'll work out. And I think for the most part, at least like comparing it probably to last year, I've been doing at least a little bit, kind of like a better balance between working with traditional medium and digital medium. So if you follow me on Threads, I actually post like majority of my whips and a lot of my traditional sketches on there. And I do like the fact that it feels like I'm just chucking my photos and my artwork into kind of like a void, because I don't know who's gonna see it and I don't really care who sees it. So at that point, like I'm just gonna post it, leave, and then I don't really have like any pressure about it. But I feel like my other social media, I feel too curated on what I tend to post. So maybe if I get more into my traditional art again, I'll start posting them again on my Instagram and my Twitter. But for the most part, I've been trying to keep them separate. But this year so far, I think it's been nice that I've been kind of doing both, like kind of on and off, and being able to switch. But enough rambling, I guess. So moving on, I decided that I wasn't going to continue painting that piece. There is like a portion of that painting that I ended up not really adding a lot of detail as we got closer to the one bottom right hand corner. Part of it's because there's the binder clip there, but another part of it's just because I was kind of fed up with the piece, so I wanted to just do something else that's a little bit more in my comfort zone, I guess, which is graphite drawing. So anything with the pencil makes it a little bit more easy for me to work with, and I can kind of just choose whether or not I want to make it more detailed or less detailed. But sometimes when I do painting mediums, I do have a lot of regret if I don't build it up to like a certain finish. But graphite, I feel okay if it's like, if it's simple and it's left at a very unfinished state, versus like a lot of my painting mediums or even like marker drawings, like alcohol marker drawings, I tend to want to have more of a finished, polished look, which I don't think is super necessary, especially when you're working in a sketchbook. I think it's better probably to be more experimental and let things just like, if it doesn't work out, leave it in your sketchbook. Don't like always cover it up, don't tear it out, just leave it. Because I think it's also fun to see your frustrations from the past, I guess, in your sketchbook, even though sometimes it can be unpleasant. But for the most part, now that I'm looking at like my sketchbook as a whole right now, I'm kind of glad that I've been sketching a lot more in my sketchbook. So I feel like you can kind of see like the phases that I go through, and it's kind of nice that because I'm sketching more, I can kind of see my mood or like what medium I'm into that month or that week, that day, or what I was watching that at that time. So it feels like a little bit of a log, and I kind of want to use maybe my next sketchbook a little bit more like that. I might have talked about it very briefly in a different video, but I received a very cute kind of like flower single page calendar. So like it's like a daily calendar. So some of the pages that I feel like, oh, I know I'm gonna draw in my sketchbook, I will actually tear out that page of the calendar paste it in my sketchbook and kind of use that as like a date marker where it's like, this was February 2nd, this is when you drew this, or like this was January 20th, this is when you drew this. And it kind of marks the pages and it kind of gives it a cute aesthetic as well, or like sometimes I try to match the color palettes to it. So yeah, just more things that I feel like I'm letting myself be a little bit more loose in my sketchbook at this point. But I think that's it for this session. So a little bit gouache on the one side, on the right side, a little bit of graphite on the left side, and yeah, I think that's it for today's spread. I know it's not like a cohesive spread like I usually do for my sketchbook doodles, but I also think that's not necessary in a sketchbook either. Oh, also on this page is actually one of the calendar pages, so I kind of stuck it in, and I'll be sketching that later today. But that's it for today's video, and I'll talk to you guys next time. Bye!